Welcome to Stitch Happens. This is episode number 6. The topic for today is cotton and innovation. So, Dr. Dori, please speak to the history of cotton and innovation, past innovations that help cotton expansion and growth, and also please introduce yourself.
So Emiko, happy to be back with you again, talking about cotton. So I am Dr. Dori Tunstall, design anthropologist, focus on the relationship between what we design and culture. I have a firm called Dori Tunstall Inc., which helps in some ways build respectful relationship with culture communities as it affects design. And just happy to be in conversation again with you. It's always lovely. So cotton, to talk about cotton, to follow the advertisement, it's the fabric of our lives. For us Black folks, it has been a source of our oppression. But in that oppression, it's also been a source of creativity. It's also been a source of passing on culture to future generations. It's been a source of expression. So we have a very, very complicated relationship to cotton, as do everyone else, right? So Egyptians have a very complicated relationship to cotton as it was brought in by the French to replace their own sort of linen and cotton production. It's a complicated relationship among India, where supposedly cotton originates as one of the most prominent forms of cotton originates. It has some of the, India's always had some of the most sophisticated textile traditions around cotton that even showed up in the tombs of the Egyptians.
Wow.
And so to talk about cotton is to talk about the history of humanity in many ways, in terms of how we clothed ourselves from the earliest days. So what is it that you really need to talk about in the entire history of it? For me, I always think about cotton in terms of, like I said, the way it has been harmfully impactful to the growth and development of the lands and the waters that we claim as the United States. You asked about, what are some inventions? I think often of the cotton gin.
Yes.
One of those reminders for us around what does it mean to design a technology that's just about efficiency? And what is the negative impact that can happen when efficiency doesn't take into account the lives that it is impacting through its efficiency? So to tell the story of the cotton gin, you have to talk about the Atlantic slave trade. You have to talk about indigenous removals, Native American removal from their land. But the story really starts where in the southern part of the United States, there were kind of two types of cotton that was grown there. There was the long hair cotton, which was sort of in very specific regions. It grew in very specific kind of conditions, which meant the majority of the cotton was short hair. Now, with long hair cotton, you can remove the seeds very easily, just slides out. And then you have these beautiful long strands of cotton that can be spun and woven into other things. With short hair, removing the seeds could often break the fibers. So you would end up with lower quality cotton. Okay. So in Eli Whitney was the one who invented the cotton gin on the plantation of Catherine Green in 1794. He had just graduated from Yale University, where he really couldn't afford, so he was in debt. Came down to the South as an inventor, and then worked very closely with her, enslaved Africans who, again, understood the mechanisms of removing the seeds from the cotton to create the cotton gin. And the cotton gin is just a kind of mechanism where you have a comb pick through the seeds, remove the seeds from the cotton, and it's able to do so with less breakage than having a human do it. So it was faster. So that which took an enslaved African an entire day now only took 1 hour.
Wow. Production. Wow.
Yeah. So hyper efficient. Eli Whitney is like thrilled about it. Wrote a letter to his father talking about how much money he was going to make from it. This is going to revolutionize the world. And it did, because now all of a sudden growing short haired cotton on a plantation could be profitable. So this is around, again, 1790. Actually, slavery was beginning to go down. as a
Okay.
practice because it was actually becoming too expensive to feed and keep enslaved Africans and other groups, but mostly enslaved Africans, and still
Mhm.
run a profit. So it was actually beginning to go into decline. Now that all of these European settlers, farmers, plantation owners could make money off of growing short hair cotton, they needed more slaves to grow and pick the cotton. So whereas in I think like, 1890, there was like 700 and something thousand enslaved Africans.
Uh-huh.
The number had increased to 3.2 million by
Wow.
1850.
By 1850? Wow. Wow.
3.2 million.
Wow. Wow.
And because they needed more land, so this is again in the southern part of the United States, the traditional holders of that land were like the five major indigenous nations, the Cherokee, the Chickasaw, the Choctaw, the Creek, and the Seminole nations. 1830, Andrew Jackson signs the Indian Removal Act, in which 100,000 members of these indigenous nations are forced off of their lands
Wow.
to basically Oklahoma in what is
Mhm.
called the Trail of Tears. So the efficiency provided by the cotton gin led to greater enslavement by 5 times, right, of Africans, led
Mhm.
to the removal of Native American nations from their tribe, violating treaties that have been long-standing, all because Eli Whitney wanted to make money and to drive efficiency in production through some innovation.
Wow. Wow. Were there duplicates of the cotton gin? Was
Well,
he the
the
author of
beautiful part of the story is that the patent process was just he actually wrote one of the first patents
Wow.
for the United States.
Wow.
Again, we're talking like 1790, so remember 70s just we're still we're still fighting the British. So the good thing is that he actually ended up not making a lot of money from the cotton gin,
Mhm.
because there wasn't the enforcement of patent protection as there is today. And so
Okay.
people just copied it. They would buy it and copy it and make their own. And there was lots of advertisements from all over,
Uh-huh.
of so and so's cotton gin and so so's cotton gin, and
Wow.
an original cotton gin versus a replicate cotton gin. And so he actually didn't make money of it, but again, like that also aided in the expansion,
Right.
right? Because again, efficiency and everyone being able to produce higher quality cotton allowed more land to be needed and more labor to be required from enslaved Africans. And you have to understand, like at one point at a time, right? Like in the early 1800s, 4/5 of all the cotton that was being used in production came from the United States. So this is informing the cotton mills in Birmingham, England.
Wow.
This is the cotton that's used in the mills in Massachusetts. This is the cotton that's being imported into India.
Wow.
Again, pretty much the home of cotton.
Right.
And part of the colonial project of the British coming in and destroying their cotton industry so that they
Mhm.
can promote their cotton industry from American cotton and British cotton mills and textile mills being imported into India.
Wow. Did
So
it
again,
stabilize?
huh?
I'm sorry. I was going to say, did it stabilize? Like, did the numbers stabilize for a long period of time? Like, how long was the cotton gin like hot? Like you understand me?
Well,
Like,
I mean, it's still you still have them. They're all
yeah,
mechanized now, so you still
right.
have it. It's still a required technology. It's
Yeah.
just it's all mechanical, so it's a giant machine that you feed it into. That's the size of a room that
It
you
was
feed it in.
beautiful. To your point, I went to a farm that was maybe a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, and to your point, it was huge. It was an entire huge machine. I mean, and also I grew up with cotton gin, so I had seen them before. But yeah, I was just thinking, especially because they imported so many. To your point earlier, enslaved Africans, the numbers continue to escalate to bring in more people, or did it
Well,
finally?
again, in 1850 is when you have, so one of the things that they point is that the expansion of cotton production in the South due to the cotton gin is actually what led to the Civil War.
Wow.
because the differences, right, between the North and the South, the expansion, right, that kept trying to head west or whatever with new states coming in, all of a sudden got to a irresolvable tension point, to the point that the South said, you know what, we're just going to succeed from the rest of what's going on. And then that led to the Civil War, which is where actually Eli, when he made his money, because he actually developed some of the first gun technology that was easily assemblable, the mass assembly kind of guns.
Oh, wow. Wow. He was a true inventor. He's inventing pieces for a product.
Yeah.
To
Again, creating weapons of mass destruction.
okay, this is what you're creating though.
Well, but again, if the things you are making are destructive in the impact, you are not a creator. Right? You're not a creator. You don't get that title, right?
That is very true. But it makes me think of like and I cannot remember his name. It was a movie that came out a couple years ago, but he created an atom bomb. And when, as a designer, and he realized in that moment what he had created and how it could be turned from something good to something bad. And he was like, whoa, like, what did I help to create? And I think as designers, we are all responsible because we are those communicators of the product and of the service to the people and to the culture. So I think that we have a responsibility of making sure that we do more good than bad, I would say.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, and again, it's a thing where I hate those kinds of stories because like I didn't know it could be used for something harmful.
Right.
Which is like that the kind of I don't care that would allow you to make that statement.
Right.
Again, you're not a creator, you're a destroyer. And you're just trying to get out of it by saying, oh, I couldn't imagine in the history of humanity, I couldn't imagine anyone using something to harm other people.
Right.
It's like, okay, every story that we tell of making is normally a story of someone taking something that, again, someone had pure intentions around it and finding the way in which it can be used in a harmful way.
Yes.
So you don't have to look very far to see how something can be perverted from your good intentions to be used as something that's, again, a weapon.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. And I just thought about Star Wars, right? Whenever we were just talking about that, like that was like Darth Vader, like took something at. But anywho, so just going to now the next segment. Cotton for many, as you stated earlier, was a source of great pain within the Black community, but there was beauty that came out of that. Limited access and limited resources. So I am the daughter of cotton pickers. So both my mom and dad started picking cotton at the age of 5. And so imagine they had to stop school. They couldn't start school in August with the rest of the kids. They had to wait until September to start. And so both my mom and my dad, they were out there in their separate family land areas. And I would ask my mom, like, well, who was out there with you? Like, to me is amazing to speak with her and to have someone that was in the field with her hands in the soil. And she said cousins, aunties, uncles, grandmas, grandpas. And whenever she started telling me like, oh, wow. And I said, well, who taught you how to pick cotton? She said her grandmother. I said, well, how did she do it? She said she gave me a satchel. She put it across of me and she picked up a piece of cotton and she showed me how to pull the seeds out. And she said, put it in your sack. And we just went row by row by row. And that's how she learned how to pick cotton. And so in that moment, it made me think of, as her grandmother was teaching her how to pick cotton, that probably was around the same area and the same land that past generations are my ancestors, also where they learned how to pick cotton, and also how they were taught within, you understand me, with having their aunties and their uncles and all of the family out there. But again, it was survival. It was about family love. It was about traditions. And I think for me, it wasn't anything necessarily negative that my mom or dad would talk about cotton. It was just a way of life. It was cotton has basically followed me in my entire life for me to become a fashion designer. So it's just amazing how, again, we're just talking about cotton and innovation, but to put it in the human context, and Sammy, it brings it a little bit different, and it gives you a different, closer to home perspective. Also,
well, I think to pause a little bit on the story that you're telling, Because I think the amazing, beautiful thing about, I say specifically us multi-generational African Americans, right? So whose ancestors go back 5, 6, 10 generations in some cases to this land here, is that our cultural heritage in many ways is to take we are the world's greatest alchemists because we know how to transmute pain into joy.
Yes. Yes.
So in the back-breaking, hand-breaking labor of picking cotton, we also created song.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Yes.
And again, to keep up the cadence of movement, right? Like they had a functional aspect, but they also, again, had messages and community and culture, which again, this forms the basis of all the popular musical forms that we have today in terms of country and jazz and blues and rock and roll and all these sort of things. So I always say we are amazing alchemists as a people because we know how to transmute pain into joy.
Yes, yes, to your point. And I think what made me also realize what you're saying is the day that I saw my grandmother's quilt. And like I remember like my aunt and my mom have talked about my grandmother's quilts, but I had never touched one. I had never felt one before. And so when my aunt got it, she was like, okay, Miko, it's heavy. She was like, so imagine as a designer, I'm always thinking about like lightness, weight of fabric and things of that nature. But I would have never thought about the weight of a quilt, meaning like that weight was for a reason. It was for warmth. It was for comfort. And the particular quilt that I'm talking about, my grandmother had 5 boys. So she always had blue jeans. So she would, the torn up blue jeans, she would make quilts out of them. And so my uncle told me these amazing stories where my grandmother and other women would sit around in a circle in the middle of the floor and they would just sit and they would make quilts. And so she would stack them up during the winter because he said every room was super duper cold. So they just had quilts just piled on top of them for warmth. And of course they had the heater in the corner, the little fireplace. But imagine as she's sitting there and she's stitching, and even whenever I was sitting there looking at the stitches, I said, this is her DNA speaking to me, right? These are the patterns that she put inside of this quilt, and she hand stitched each one of them. So imagine this heavy quilt, and it's the size of a wall. And she sat there and she hand stitched that. And that's speaking back to our ancestors, speaking to us through our DNA, through the languages, either verbal or nonverbal, but speaking to sitting around family and comfort and warmth and creating something beautiful out of a situation that was not necessarily always, or especially for Black people, beautiful, but making a beautiful moment out of hurt, out of pain. So I think that is just so beautiful to be able to speak back to blue jeans, denim. But then my question to you is, can you speak to the durability of cotton and history of dyeing and indigos? Because I think for us, whenever we just spoke to our ancestors, they had to have durability. They had to have clothes that, as they weren't on asphalt walkways like we are right now, right? They were having to be sometimes in the trenches, sometimes in the dirt, sometimes in the soil. So they had to have clothing that was way more durable and a little bit heavier for that weight for that longevity of life. Yeah. And speaking of life, for an apparel piece, can you imagine how long their apparel pieces lasted? Disposable fashion right now.
Well, again, they survive through patchwork. Yes. They survive through patchwork. I mean, the story of cotton and indigo again goes long back, and it's a global story, right? So indigo, there are forms of indigo that comes from Africa, particularly West Africa. And when we think of it, we think of the Tuareg as the people of indigo, where their clothes have been dyed with indigo so long that like their skin is blue, right? Has a blue tint to it, right? Wow. India and China all have like histories of indigo production. And I've visited both the places where, both India and China to learn and observe their indigo production processes. But again, and we think of that our ancestors brought with them the indigo seeds.
Wow. In their hair.
Yeah, in their hair, and
Yeah.
planted them, in parts of the South,
Wow.
because they already knew, they already had a relationship with cotton from back in Africa, right? They already had a relationship with indigo from back in Africa. So that's again, we were talking, in a previous episode about cultural preservation. They were
Yeah.
preserving that culture through that knowledge and form of indigo and its relationship to cotton. And why indigo is so popular is that the indigo absorbs so well within cotton that it strengthens the fibers even more. It strengthens the fibers even more. And it's also a teller of time because, again, over time, the indigo strength and intensity begins to fade. And so again, when I was traveling to China, there was this wonderful stories that this one woman in the southern part of China was talking about where, like again, they made these wedding blankets traditionally
Oh,
of
wow.
indigo dyed. And then again, as the blanket gets used and begins to fade and whatever, they'll patch it up for a while. After the patching doesn't work, then it becomes like it gets made into a pair of shoes and bits of it gets made to the point where maybe like 3 or 4 generations, the diapers
Oh,
of the great 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 grandchild is the light indigo remnants of
wow.
this great 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 grand person's original wedding blanket that was like a deep, 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 almost purple
Mhm.
indigo, right? So the story of indigo and cotton always go together. It's a global story. Again, we
Mhm.
have a particular inflection of it here in the United States that connects us to our African ancestors. But it also, again, is it's part of that powerful alchemy, right? And
Yes.
if you had to care for an indigo vat, it is
Mhm.
pure alchemy. To care for it, to watch its transformation, and then to see what it does when you have this brownish white fabric, right? All of a sudden become the color of the midnight sky, right?
Wow, beautiful. Yeah, it's so pretty. And I think for me, whenever we were talking about durability, and this is something that whenever we talked about it before, I kind of chuckled about it because it put a time frame on. I don't know if kids still have these terms anymore, but play clothes versus school clothes. So talk about the durability and the reasons why people, especially moms, was like, no, as soon as you got home, make sure you take your school clothes off and put your play clothes on. There was
Mhm.
a reason why. And what was that, Midori?
Well, again, it's because, unlike the overconsumption that we face today,
Right.
again, clothing was expensive. Clothing, the material was expensive. It was handmade, right? So that took time and resources to be able to make it. And by handmade, I mean also made on a sewing machine, not just like hand stitched, right? And so then you couldn't afford in many ways to tear your clothing by playing because you didn't have so many sets. Like I think of it as like we just had Easter Sunday just passed a few weeks ago, right? I don't know when this is going to go off, but when we were recording this, the Easter Sunday was just a couple of weeks ago. And I think of like the importance of the Easter hat and the Easter
Right.
suit, right? As
Yes.
like a clear, because in some cases, you may only get a new set of church clothes twice a
Yes.
year. One maybe
Correct.
for Christmas and maybe one for Easter, right? And that's like, half the year away from each other, right?
Correct.
So our clothes had to be durable because you weren't going to be sure you're going to get another pair. You had your Sunday dress, you had
Correct.
your work aprons, you had
Yes.
your party dress, right?
Yes.
So you might have like 5 or 6 items in your wardrobe, right?
Right.
If we're going back to like say the early 1800s,
Right.
um, before fast fashion, where you can buy 8 sets of clothes in one shopping trip,
Correct.
right?
Correct. And that speaks to sustainability by necessity. Sorry, let me repeat that.
Yeah.
Sustainability by necessity within the
Well,
Black
but
community.
you know, and we had a bit of conversation with that, and I'm starting to feel a little and I say this discomfort about that in myself because in some ways we're like equating sustainability as a lifestyle choice with actually significant economic deprivation.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it begs the question of like if Black folks had the material resources, would we have been sustainable? Is that necessarily an ingrained cultural attribute, right? If we had the resources that were required, right, necessary, was due to us as a people. Because it's a thing where, again, like you and I are like maybe first and second generation of like the post 1964 groups, right? Where we have grown up where we can go fast fashion shopping and get 8 outfits in one go, right? So I'd say the fact that we have had more resources as a generation.
Yes.
Again, I'm not necessarily seeing the principles of sustainability that we would have culturally had, like we assume that we culturally had in the past, right?
Right.
So I'm in my head, I'm making a difference between, sustainability as a lifestyle choice. I understand my relationship to all the things around me, and I'm going to make better choices about what I buy and what it's for and its durability and how I use it versus economic deprivation that prevents me, coerces me from being able to consume, right? Well, in some cases, to a level to survive.
Correct. Yeah, and that just touched on the need versus overconsumption versus buying power. And I think whenever you said it to me earlier, it's almost like I didn't even get it to the point where back when my mom was a seamstress, back whenever she would make my sister's clothes, and I'm sure she made also some of my clothes because of limited funds and resources of income, right? And she's going to put that income towards a bill versus no, you don't need another dress. You already got another dress. I just made you one. But then that buying power in our generation increased for us to be able to have fast fashion and to be able to have 8 sets of clothing in one shopping cart and then hit buy, right? But it doesn't necessarily make it right, nor, and to your point, I've always looked at the Black community as being sustainable because we did have limited resources. But then at the same time, some of those attributes are not being seen because they're not being applied now. But I feel like regardless, right, we all should be going back to those less buy, overconsumption, less fast fashion. How do we make more recycled, more repairable things? How do we go back to circular systems, circular design? And I think that that's something in the Black community that we never talk about, but I feel like it's always there, but we don't necessarily. But then what do you think of the future of Black buying power and also durability, sustainability within the Black community with cotton?
Well, I would say we're getting pushed back there whether we want to or not. Right?
Community, right?
We are being pushed back there whether we want to or not. So again, like as the structures that supported the creation and expansion of a Black middle class in the post 1964, right? America, United States, as those things are being systematically dismantled, right? So the effect of firing federal employees in many federal agencies, 25% of the employment base was Black, African American, and those provided middle class jobs. Right. That afforded people middle class lifestyles. Gone.
Yeah.
So as we are being pushed back, like I said, I'm going back to my great grandmother's and ancestors' survival skills. I took up a sewing course to learn how to make my own clothes in a better way. Oh my God, I'm like, French seams are not my friend, but I'm learning them, right? Because I know in the changes in my lifestyle, as I move away from working for elite institutions, I'm not going to have the resources to go and have haute couture make me a ball gown to attend a gala, right, from scratch. So I need to, but I still, again, I still have a great respect And I know the value of
Right.
having clothes made for you bespoke. So I may not be able to pay others to do it, but I am going to need to learn the skills so I
Yes.
can do that work myself, right?
Yes.
Again, I'm being part of a community garden because that's a
Nice.
survival skill to
Yes.
know how to grow food, how to harvest it, when to harvest it. And like I'm focused less on food because a lot of the people in the garden are food. I'm growing medicinals. I'm setting up a little apothecary
Okay.
so that if we catch a cold, right,
Mm.
and we may not want to go to the doctor, or the healthcare may not be available to go to the doctor. So we're gonna, like we go back to
Yeah.
ginger
Oh,
and
yes.
honey,
Yes.
right?
That is very true. Very
So
true. And
my so
uh,
so again, the story of let's go back to the story of cotton is the story of cotton helps tell us a story of the continued community and individual resilience that we need to build. We go back, right? We may not be able to afford heating bills that are high again. So we
mhm.
go back to making quilts and blankets out of
Yes.
now we have so much fast fashion to
Yes.
use as the stuffing, right?
Yes.
In the quilt to add those layers of weight, right? We
Very true.
go back to those so that we can lower our heating bills in the cold winters and care for not just ourselves, but each other.
Yes. And those are sustainable practices, what you just said. Yes. And I think also just to touch on this, having moms that were seamstresses and that they were the makers and the innovators and the doers. And it created spaces within the Black community where you were taught to take up a trade, right? You were taught to take up doing or making in order to create income for yourself and also for the community. And that's everything that you just spoke to. How do we as a community come back together, circle each other, and then how do we create? You create over there in your little plot of some corn and some medicinal, because we do have cold. So what are those organic things that you
Mhm.
will be able to go out to your urban garden or your rooftop urban garden to be able to pull from? But I think that that's just a beautiful thing. And going back to community circular systems, and I know I keep talking about that because I feel like if we go back to zero waste, and I think that we will be able to have, especially from a product standpoint, as far as how we make things, how do we make things better, how do we create things that are, again, and I'm thinking about the next generation, they should not have to deal with our landfill of stuff, right? Because we're going to leave all of that stuff for them. We're going to be gone and all of our stuff is still going to be here. So how can we start to make better choices and incorporate better practices, sustainable practices, so that we can pass that on to the next generation of, so that we can start being educated a little bit more on how to do better, make better, and then just be a more equal, better planet profit. And I know we talked about profit, but profit within the community. So, any lasting comments to the audience of the next generations of that you would like to speak to?
I mean, I think so again, I think when you're making something and the only value is efficiency, you are
Yeah.
most likely leading to create a weapon of mass destruction, right? So, yeah. So think about what are the values behind what is you make. Are you, again,
Yes.
I say I design for liberatory joy. Liberatory means being able to say no to things that are harmful to you, your
Mhm.
communities that you embrace, and the environments that you live in,
Nice.
right? It's super simple, right? Because it's the thing is like, okay, is this harmful or not? And am I in a situation where I can say no to doing this harmful thing? You need to think about that in terms of the places you work and the choices you make. And you put that to the test, right? Of any material you're going to choose, it's going to be harmful to the environment. It's going to be harmful to my communities. Is it going to be harmful to me, right?
Correct.
Pretty simple. Joy is about connecting. So is this going to connect me to myself? Am I betraying myself? Is it connecting me to communities? Is it connecting me to my environment? So again, if I'm efficiently digging up every tree in the area or polluting some water, right? And again, we have to think about this, like cotton is very polluting,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Indigo dyeing is very
Exactly.
polluting,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So we always have to think about those things as well. And so I say, if you're designing for efficiency, no excuse. You're designing a weapon of mass destruction.
Right. And
If you're designing for liberatory joy, if that's your
Mhm.
design brief, then again, you have a pathway to design something meaningful and non-harmful and connecting. And why would you want to make anything else?
Right. Beautiful. That was so beautiful, Dr. Dory. Thank you, Dr. Dory, for being my guest on episode 6. You are amazing, amazing conversation on cotton and innovation. Thank you so much for being a part of the show today and for sharing with the audience. Thank you, Dr. Dory. This is Stitch Happens.